Welcome back to the Peanut Butter and Mountains podcast. Today we're getting into a Q&A from my Instagram audience all about the Wonderland Trail. There's some good questions here. Can't wait to dive into it, so let's go. All right, so there was a lot of questions from people about the permits. Are permits required, or is walking okay? Did you have to do a lottery, or could you reserve? How many times did you have to apply before getting a permit? And I'm just going to tell you that I did a walk-up permit. The Park Service reserves a third of permits for walk-up use. And typically what people will do when they think of the Wonderland Trail is they think that you have to have a permit secured in advance before hiking the trail that you'd have to do online like many months before, which is an option to do. I don't like being that unflexible, so I wanted to do a walk-up permit. Now, what a lot of people will do is they'll wake up at 5 a.m. and then get to the trailhead that they want to get the permit at, and they'll go in and give an itinerary to the ranger, and the ranger will approve it or kind of will work on it to make it better and make it fit for the people that are already out there, and then give you hopefully a permit. What I did was I actually went in the evening. So I did the opposite of the way most people do it, and because I got there in the evening, so I went there at 3 p.m., there was nobody there in terms of other people. I went to the ranger. This is a tip too, is you want to bring preloaded itineraries to the ranger to see if they will work. And what that means is that if there's already people staying at those campsites and you have an itinerary where you wanted the campsite, you obviously can't camp there. So you got to figure out something else. When you go there for a walk-up permit, come in with a bunch of different itineraries. Counterclockwise, clockwise. Don't be picky about the campsites that you want to stay at because you're probably not going to get them. The other tip with the walk-up is you're going to have more success going midweek, and you're also going to have more success with campsites going midweek. But remember when you're going to be ending your trip as well, because if you're ending or if you're trying to get a campsite on a Friday night, that's going to be harder to do than midweek. I kind of didn't really realize that when I was creating my itineraries, that Friday might be a tougher spot because the first itinerary that I gave the ranger didn't work. So I had to do it a different way with a different thing, but I already had this preloaded in my phone. So that was clutch. And something that I really recommend to do, walk-up permits are the way to go for Wonderland, in my opinion. B.Pop T asked, how do you deal with loneliness? Now, I do solo hikes all the time, and so this is something that always can be a crux for people that are doing solo hikes. And I will just say this, that try to get around people when they're on trail as much as you can, and that just means talk to people when you get to a campsite or talk to people when you're hiking. That'll help with that loneliness. Also, download some good audiobooks. Really good hack right there. Danny_Doutry asks, how did it compare to the JMT? I've done Wonderland and then have JMT permit for August. So that's cool. JMT permit in August. I would be a little concerned about that just in terms of fires and things. This is why I started the Wonderland in July, is because of fires. And as you can see now, I mean, there's fires are erupting already, and it's July 24th of 2024. When I did the JMT, I did it in July, and then in August or late August that same year, people had to be evacuated out of there because of fires. I would always recommend starting trails earlier. How did it compare? I would say it is almost the same mo. So what I mean by that is you have these giant ups, and then you have these giant descents. I do think that the JMT was more challenging, though, because in addition to the ascents and descents, a lot of that is at, obviously, altitude, and then it's also exposed to the sun, whereas the Wonderland was not really exposed to the sun. But if you were good with the vert and the ascent and the descent in the Wonderland, you'll be kind of used to that on the JMT. That's kind of how the JMT works. Again, you're going to be dealing with the altitude and exposure to the sun a lot more on the JMT. But I think that the views are a lot better on the JMT as well. You're really just you're not in the trees that much on the JMT is kind of what I'm saying. You are at some points when you're getting down in the valleys when you're doing your campsites, but a lot of it is above tree line. Giaio says, what were the campsites you stayed at like? Were they roomy, crowded? I'll say all the campsites that I stayed at were pretty private, meaning that you had some good privacy. A lot of times most of the time you're staying in the trees, at least I did, unless you're staying at Summerland or you're staying at Clapatchie Park, but I didn't obviously draw permits for that. Most of the campsites that I was at, they were super shaded. They were pretty cozy with trees, and so you really didn't have any privacy issues. I think the worst campsite that I was at, actually, though, would have been Golden Lakes, and the reason was because if you get the 1 through 3 campsites, number one, it's by the privy. Number two, There's no stream for white noise, so you can hear everything. And then number 3, the campsites are pretty much right next to each other, and there's not a lot blocking them. So you can hear people talking. If you're somebody that really likes your privacy, that one's a tougher one to be camping at. I wouldn't really recommend Golden Lakes, but Nickel Creek, Carbon River, all those were really good, and all of them had really, really good white noise to help you fall asleep. So yeah, I wouldn't say that they were too crowded. Besides Golden Lakes kind of felt a little crowded. Okay, now this I don't know the username, but she's got a couple of really good questions because it sounds like they're doing the trail in September. They said, okay, what was the most difficult aspect for you on the trail? I think the amount of vertical with the trail was quite a bit. I think that some of the descents were very steep, not well graded, 22% grades at some points. So you're really going slow on the descents. You think you're going to make up all this time, and then you get to some of these descents, specifically down from Clapatchie, and you just go dang near as slow as going uphill. So those kind of sucked. I would say that was probably the most difficult aspect of the trail for me, was just the large amount of vertical every single day. But I was doing bigger miles. But I will say this, that an 18-mile day on the Wonderland Trail is not an 18-mile day on the Colorado Trail. I think an 18-mile day on the Wonderland equals about a 23, 24-mile day on the Colorado Trail. But it's also, referring to the JMT question before, it is kind of in the ballpark of the JMT. So hopefully that makes sense. Sydney Marie says, how many bear sightings did you have? I had 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 bear sightings, all at the same place in Golden Lakes. That was why Golden Lakes was pretty cool, though. So mom with 2 cubs and then just a lone bear as well. That was pretty cool. Sydney Marie also says exo spikes needed for any glacial hiking. I think exo spikes are a little bit less than the micro spikes are, but I didn't bring any micro spikes, and the reason was because I talked to the ranger beforehand, which is another tip. Make sure you're talking to rangers about conditions. And he was just like, the snow is too soft, too slushy to even use them, and there's really no higher angle steep stuff left. And so I left them and didn't ever felt like I needed them at all. I was totally good, and I had basically all snow hiking from about Panhandle Gap through that basin there all the way to Indian Creek. So yeah, no micro spikes for me. Sydney Marie 34 also says she's hiking this in August. Any unexpected obstacles you didn't plan for? Like I said before, I think just the descents were just pretty heinous, some of them. Rachel Staffler says, tell me about the water crossings. Water crossings were generally all pretty easy. There was quite a bit of them. Basically, all the bridges were in. There was one bridge that was out, and I forget the river it was, but it was kind of later in the day that I had to do it, and it was rushing pretty quickly, even though it was a small stream. And you could feel the power, but that is why I would recommend, not only just for this to have trekking poles, but among other things, but it will help your stability when you're doing the river crossings. Other than that, most of the bridges were all in, and that is something, if you're going, she said she's going in August, a lot of those water crossings will be in at that time. Early in the season, a lot of those water crossings aren't even in because the Park Service hasn't got to them. Krista_King says, what surprised you most about the trail? I think what surprised me most about the trail was how long I was in the trees for. I think 80% of it is in the trees. 80% of the trail versus 20% is you're actually seeing Rainier and you're seeing these big giant views that you usually see in movies and things like that. But 80% of it, you're in the trees. And depending on how you are, that could be a good thing or that could be not a good thing, I guess. For me, it was pretty hot during those days, so it was actually pretty good to be in the shaded canopies and in the trees. But after a while, you really get bored of that. That's what surprised me the most about the trail, I think. Becca Tarbox says, do you need a permit to section hike it? Yes, you still need a permit to section hike it. Basically need a permit for anything in the national park. You need a permit to stay anywhere in the national park. If you're just day hiking it, I don't think you need to do anything like that. But if you're going to be staying at a backcountry site, you need a permit for those because you're sharing them with not only someone that might be just doing an overnight, but also section hikers and also people that are on the Wonderland Trail. You got to make sure that you have a permit for that. Then Wennis Graham says, why only a 3 out of 5? So I rated this trail a 3 out of 5. And for most of the things that I've kind of discussed before, which was 80% of this is in the trees, there was not a whole lot of views. I think some of the descents were quite heinous. They were rough. There was a lot of vert with this. I ended up on my watch with 28,000 feet of vert over about 90 miles. I mean, that's a lot. That's almost double what the Colorado Trail was. So you're doing a lot of vert per mile. whether that's up or down. But intermixed with that, there's some really, really good views like at Skyscraper Pass and Clopatchie, St. Andrews Lake, Summerland. All of those areas were really cool. And I lived in Oregon for 9 years. This is kind of why I moved, was there was too much trees for me. And if you ever live in the Pacific Northwest, if you're not from the Pacific Northwest, maybe this wouldn't affect you. Maybe it would be cool. But every tree hike to me looks the same. Everything looks the same. The trees look the same. The trail looks the same. It is nice because the trail is kind of bouncy or a little more forgiving because you have the pine needles. But for me, it just doesn't do that much. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys want to have a free itinerary database planner that you can plan your Wonderland trip, I'm going to leave a free link to my Notion database template down below. And please give a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And please give a 5-star rating for Spotify if this helped you guys. All right, we'll see you for the next one.